Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Dr. Bruce Chalmers. He is a relationship expert, and we're going to talk about his most recent book, Betrayal and Forgiveness: How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. And we're going to get into stability and intimacy and all this type of thing. And as someone who is absolutely a disaster at relationships, I always enjoy these conversations because I don't even know what a relationship is anymore these days. So, but we have Dr. Chalmers here to help us understand this. So, welcome to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So, why don't we begin from the beginning before we get into all my problems and find out a little bit about yourself and your book?
I can tell you about some of my problems too. I mean, who gets into my field, I suppose, who hasn't had some of those same problems? I mean, that is often the case for many of us. It certainly was true in my own life.
No, I mean, it's the
Yeah,
infamous person who wrote the dating book on their second marriage, sort of thing.
exactly. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And well, in fact, that actually is accurate in my case. I am in a second marriage. So
We
uh,
found another one.
you found another one. Yeah. Actually, and I don't mind telling the very short story of my first marriage. Both my ex and I went on to marry really wonderful women, and we're both a lot happier. That's basically how that turned out. So
Yes,
we
no.
both have great wives. It's great.
I had a buddy
So
of mine who went through something very similar. High school sweetheart. They were together. They were together a long time. When I met him, when we were like, he was 22 and I was 24, and they got married and everything and whatnot. And she met a really great woman and decided that was much better for her. And
yep.
he's not taken it well, but I think he'll be
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I
I
need to
hope.
call him. I haven't talked to him in a little while.
Yes,
So
indeed.
yeah,
So
he
anyway, I've
yes.
been a psychologist now for over 30 years. I actually been in private practice for over 30 years,
Mm,
and the latter part of that I focus almost entirely on couples because I've just really enjoyed doing that work. It's inspiring work. I work with a lot of folks I mean, anybody who makes an appointment with me, I will often note nobody makes an appointment with me just to tell me how well everything is going. That's not why you call up a couples therapist. So
no.
obviously they're having issues,
Things have not gone well.
things that, well, by the time they're calling me, things have generally speaking not gone well. And I mean, there's the occasional exception where they want like premarital counseling or something like that, just to sort of head it off at the pass. But
Right.
mostly folks are in a lot of pain when they first contact me. And I have just found over the years of working with people, it's so inspiring to see how people struggle with it. I mean, and they, rise to the occasion. Sometimes they stay together, sometimes they don't. But the folks that can actually face what they're dealing with and recognize that even when it's painful, there's got to be some meaning in it. I just find that very inspiring. So the book that you referred to, this is my most recent book. I wrote that. First of all, I've noted that a substantial majority of the couples that I work with are dealing with some kind of betrayal. I think regular old infidelity is about half of them, actually. It's very, very common in my practice. So there's that. And then even when people aren't coming with infidelity per se, they're often feeling betrayed in some other way by their partner or, just dealing with a lot of pain. So I learned a lot from working with people over the years. And I wanted to share some of that with the folks who read the book in hopes that it's helpful. And people who've read it are telling me, yeah, it is helpful.
No, no, that's very no, that's very good and very important. I want to sort of I kind of want to get into the whole, infidelity and betrayal sort of thing because betrayal can come in many forms.
Yes,
Um,
it can.
what are the ones that you see most often outside of the obvious one? He or she slept with someone else.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's certainly the most common one, but sometimes it's somebody commits some kind of financial impropriety and doesn't tell their partner.
Mm,
There's that. Gets in heavy duty debt. Maybe they have a gambling problem, or maybe they just make some really bad decisions and they don't tell their partner about it. So the person ends up feeling like betrayed because they thought things were okay and they weren't. Sometimes it's about extended family issues. I have in my book, actually, they're not all partners or romantic couples. They're often, there are many of them that were that way, but some of the examples I have in the book are from like siblings, adult siblings, or parents and adult children, or in one case I have friends who also became business partners, and then one of them betrayed betrayed the other. And so, there's all, as you say, betrayal can come in a lot of different forms. And, the other thing is if you've lived long enough, and you don't have to be that old to say this, I don't think.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm in my 70s. I've been around a while, but if you're in your anywhere from probably from your mid 20s on, you've probably experienced some kind of betrayal, and maybe even younger, because people get their hearts broken, and that often feels very much like a betrayal.
No, no, absolutely. And I kind of want to go to kind of the other end of the angle, and the one I see a lot in my friends and for whom um it seems to be more common. I see it a lot, but I think it's very difficult to talk about, and that's the dead bedroom phenomena. People are still
Mm.
together, but the sex has died.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it's kind of funny because I there was kind of a rash of divorces through my friend group because of COVID, and that who wasn't going through that. But then those who survived, they're not doing well. A lot of dead bedroom situations, a lot of just sex not happening, all this type of thing. How do you start that conversation? How do you come back from that?
Well, you mentioned in the intro something that I'd mentioned I like to talk about, which is the difference, the conflict really between stability and intimacy. And dead
Mhm.
bedroom syndrome has a lot to do with that. So what happens is, yeah, it's just a way of understanding the whole project of being in a couple. Why do we do, why does our species couple up? I mean, yes, we're mammals, we reproduce sexually, but people couple up even when they're not about reproducing. How does
Yeah.
that explain gay couples? It doesn't. How does that explain people my age getting together with other people my age? We're obviously past the age of childbearing. So we have a couple of things we're trying to get. The needs we have in a couple are, one need is stability. We want to feel like things aren't shaky and driving us crazy all the time. We want to keep the anxiety level relatively low. What that requires is the skill of being pretty predictable. Showing up when you say you're going to show up, and not cheating, and mostly being sober, because somebody with serious substance issues can be hugely destabilizing to a relationship, and that kind of stuff. All of those things tend to be about stability, and stability is really important. I'm not knocking it. The chief skills of stability are all about keeping the anxiety level low. Well, intimacy, and here, what I mean by intimacy, I mean in a pretty broad sense, not just sexual intimacy, but intimacy in terms of being present and honest, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually, however you want to say it, with yourself and each other.
Mm.
Showing up and being there. And yeah, I realize we all have mixed feelings. It's not like you show up with just one feeling, but to show up and be willing to know who you are and be willing to hear who your partner is. That's what I mean by intimacy. There's no couples are intimate 24/7, but intimacy is every bit as much of a need for a couple as stability is. And what happens is that, and this, by the way, everything I'm saying here applies to non-crazy, non-evil, non-stupid people, or to put it in a more positive sense, to sane, intelligent, good people.
Yeah.
This happens too. You don't have to invoke some kind of, weird pathology for this to happen. What
Mhm.
stable couples tend to do is they will prize stability, especially when they do bizarre things like, get married and have children.
Right.
I often comment to the folks who have children, it's like, so I see the problem here. You not only had children, but you actually give a shit about them. See, that's the problem. If you didn't give a shit about your children, it'd be a lot easier to deal with them. But the weird
Let me
thing is,
just clip that out and send that to my parents. That
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely,
To
yes.
be kind of like, does this sound familiar? No, it wouldn't, but that's another topic for another podcast.
That
That's
is, yeah, that's a sounds like an interesting conversation though. So anyway, the point being,
many such cases, though. I know a lot of people who had kids, didn't care, and it
well,
shows.
yes,
But yeah,
that is a bummer. But in
yeah,
general, the what I'm saying is that people prize stability when they have it,
of
and
course.
the chief skills of stability are all about, say, keeping the anxiety level low. The chief skill of intimacy is to tolerate anxiety, which often people think of
Ooh,
that's
say that one more
tolerate.
time.
Yeah, that's like people look at me funny when I say that. When it's like
Yeah.
the chief skill of intimacy is to tolerate anxiety. Now, why should that be true? If shouldn't
Mhm.
intimacy, whatever it means, if you're talking about sex or talking about anything else, doesn't it mean it feels good? Well, yeah, it does when it does. But intimacy also includes things that don't feel good. What if you want to say to your partner, I want to issue a garden variety complaint. I wish you wouldn't do X, Y, or Z that you're doing, or I wish you would do more of X, Y, or Z that you're not doing, or whatever. That's going to raise anxiety. It's not going to be fun. If the couple has had enough experiences of a conversation like that going off the rails and they end up fighting or they end up in a deep freeze or whatever, it's really unpleasant, so they will tend to avoid it. And it's not just complaints I'm talking about, of course. It's even deeper than that. What if somebody wants to say to a partner, this comes up in the sexual domain a lot. What if you want to tell your partner you have this fantasy and you're worried your partner's going to think you're really weird for having it? And, so people will tend to do is not say that because they're worried about how their partner will react. Or even outside the sexual domain, somebody says, I've been thinking, I want us to see if we can find a way to live in Europe for 6 months, or who knows what it would be. And you're worried if you say that to your partner, they're going to freak out. So, for all of those reasons, what stable couples tend to do is avoid rocking the boat too much because it feels too scary.
Mm.
And avoiding anxiety is not a weird thing to want to do. Anxiety by design of evolution, anxiety sucks. It's supposed to feel bad. It's a message from your body saying, "Oh, change this. This is dangerous." So we do tend to avoid anxiety. Well, a lot of times intimacy requires tolerating anxiety. So that's what tends to happen. And when that happens, people will avoid trying something new. They'll avoid raising something that they're worried might upset their partner or might freak out their partner or whatever. And that's, if you think about that, that's a recipe for bed death right there.
Yeah.
That the idea that somebody, would never want to try anything, would never want to experience, be playful about things or whatever because they were worried about how it'll go. So that's often how stable couples lose intimacy, either sexually or more broadly. And in my favorite metaphor, and this is a little talk, by the way, that I give to almost every couple in the first session. I don't usually have a particular spiel except this one. This is a spiel I give to every couple in the first session because they always, what they tend to do is they say, "Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way." What what tends to happen, and my favorite metaphor about stability and intimacy is if you think about a plant, a living organism, seed gets planted in soil and it germinates and it sprouts and it starts to grow, and then somebody comes along and paves a sidewalk over it. Why would they pave a sidewalk over it? Well, because it makes it more stable, doesn't it? It's like if you don't want to walk on the squishy, so you nice to have a sidewalk. So they pave a sidewalk over it. Well, there's the plant, and what will the plant try to do? It won't just sit there. It'll either crack the sidewalk or die trying. And metaphorically, what happens in couples is if you think about what that plant is, the roots of the plant are necessary. They provide stability. But intimacy is the energy for growth. Intimacy is that which is trying to crack the sidewalk. And what happens in a couple when metaphorically, when that sidewalk gets paved over, is somebody or somehow or the couple itself will try and crack the sidewalk. Now, what does it look like? Sometimes it looks like a deep freeze. So sometimes what happens with a deep freeze is one or both parties get very depressed, or perhaps one or both parties just unexpectedly says, "I can't stand this, I'm out of here." Or one or both parties has an affair, which is not the only reason people have affairs, but it's one of the biggies. Then things when intimacy is compromised in their primary relationship because we crave intimacy. So we become very vulnerable to someone else showing you that kind of attention.
Yeah.
So all of those reasons are why stable couples, and that was the subtitle of my first book, Reigniting the Spark, why stable couples lose intimacy. That's why. Now, how do you get that back? Well, what you have to do is tolerate the anxiety of intimacy. And that, what couples therapy can do is provide a space where you can have those scary conversations without them going off the rails. And the more couples do that, then they can start to feel alive. Now, starting to feel alive does not always mean they decide, "Oh, good, we're happy now and we're going to stay together." Sometimes starting to feel alive means for one or both parties, "Oh my God, we're two fine people, but we're not right for each other." And that's a bummer when I don't like that, but often that's success.
No, that actually segues exactly into the type of questions I want to ask you because I am breakup recovery. It will have been a year and a couple of months.
Mm.
Um, and I've discovered some very interesting things about relationships, especially in like the final conversations I had with her before I finally said, I have to block you because I have to move on. And if
Yeah.
we keep having conversations every day and we just keep relitigating this, I'm never going to move on. I've got to put a boundary there.
Yep.
And she's not happy about that. And I hear about it because she has a number of many of my friends and they tell me about how unhappy with this decision she is.
Yeah.
Um, and it I mean, I definitely I love about the tolerating anxiety for intimacy, and that speaks so resonantly to me because as someone who is autistic, the whole perception thing and how we are perceived and how we do or do not like to be perceived by anyone is a very difficult thing. And one of the things she found frustrating, and she's like, "Well, but I shouldn't, you shouldn't feel that way about me." And I'm kind of like, "It's any human. Are you
Mm.
human? If not, we have other problems. But
Yes,
like, it's
indeed.
any human. Like, it's like
Yeah.
I am only really truly myself when I'm alone. Like
Mm.
like that, if there's another person nearby, you're getting some type of performance. That's just unfortunately how this works. Um, but
That's
I
kind of the
love,
definition, right? That's part of the definition of autism, essentially.
yeah.
Maybe
No,
maybe not formally, but operationally.
breaking news: autistic man acts autistically. Film at 11.
Yeah.
So, I also love that thing because I realized when you said that about the tolerating anxiety for intimacy, I realized that was, I think, what kind of bothered me the most is there's a lot of anxiety with, you know, perception and all this type of thing, and kind of letting someone in like that and being able to kind of sit with that and tolerate that. I'm like, oh, I definitely am not comfortable in that spot, like by
Hmm.
any stretch of the imagination, sort of thing. And especially in when the person opposite it has mental health issues of their own, and sometimes stuff that you say and do can come back to bite you at
Hmm.
inconvenient moments, which is the
Yep.
joy of dating bipolar. Um, and all
There
this
is
sort of
that.
thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think those two mental issues are compatible, especially when you get into things like stability. Like I love stability and routine and not having, the fewer things I have to think about, the more relaxed I am, the more relaxed I am, the more fun I want to have, all this type of thing. When I'm constantly having to think and evaluate and calculate and all this type of, it doesn't, I'm not relaxed, sort of
Hmm.
thing. So
Sure.
that immediately, that's why I wanted you to say it twice, because like, oh, that's so good. And I think, that idea of, tolerating a certain amount of anxiety in order to have intimacy and therefore growth, and and taking, risks and doing your emotional bids and all this type of thing is like, oh, that's so good. But I also, the other kind of half of that coin, and I kind of wonder what you're going to say about this. At one point, kind of about this time last year, we were talking, and I kind of threw up my hands and I said, I don't even know what I'm supposed to get out of a relationship. But
Mm.
I don't
Yeah.
feel like I'm getting anything out of this. Like you come here, because we were doing the distance thing because she was still, I had moved to the East Coast, but I was in Delaware, she was in West Virginia, and it was not for career stuff, not workable moving wise at that time.
Hmm.
And I said, I don't know what you're supposed to get out of a relationship. I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of this. Now, according to her, and I'm quoting now, she wants to quote, make sure no one has to hear that ever again.
Hmm.
And because it was so terrible, sort of thing. And I kind of want to start with that in terms of what are we supposed to get out of relationships?
Mm.
Because as near as I can tell from stuff that I have read and whatnot since then, it really is just about like someone you want to be around and want to spend excess amounts of time with, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, which I'll admit doesn't have a ton of appeal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
It's a
mean, so
great question.
what
Yeah.
do we get? What are we supposed to get out of relationships? Like what, like what is the there? Because I've realized I am 37 years old in a couple weeks. We're recording this on the 11th of April. People won't hear this till June, but we're gonna say it was my birthday's 15 days away. And I've realized most of my relationships were like, you know, sex, even though that's kind of losing appeal at this age. Had it been done there, been that sort of thing. Or oh, I thought the person was cool, or I wanted to talk to them, all this type of thing. But I also realize, it's kind of like I've never met anyone I want to spend all the time with. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
need a break from everybody at some point, sort of things. Like, how is this actually supposed to work? What are we supposed to be getting from like a normal, healthy relationship? Because I've missed the boat, as I
Yeah.
often do. I'm consistently on the dock. So what did I miss?
What a great question. You're kind of taking it back to first principles in some way, because here I am and I'm writing these books about relationships, and I'm just sort of glibly assuming, well, we all want a relationship, right? And of course, that is not true, is it? Here's an earth-shattering observation I'm about to make. Turns out people vary, don't they? Different strokes for different folks. Who knew? Yeah,
Right.
well, actually, we all knew, didn't we?
Right.
So there are lots of people, and look, anybody I've ever talked to, there's lots of people like you. Lots of people like everybody. You know what I mean?
Right.
Before I was a psychologist, I was a statistician. That's my old statistician brain talking. It's like, you know
Mm.
what? If I'm meeting people who are different from me in whatever way, I'll bet there's a lot of other people like them, just like there's a lot of other people like me. Isn't that interesting? The world is full of all sorts of different people. So this, believe it or not, is coming around to answering your question. Me personally, I'm one of those people, and I have no idea what the proportions are here, by the way, but
Mm.
I'm one of those people that wants to be in a relationship. The silly thing I like to say, I mentioned I'm in a second marriage, right? I liked being married even when my marriage wasn't working. I'm delighted to be in a marriage that is working, but even when it wasn't, I wanted to be in a marriage. Now, does that mean I'm weird or something? I don't think so. Lots of people are like me. There's this I think there's some element of the usual combination of genes and experience. The usual combination of everything is why the way they are, the genetics and experience. So there are some of us who are just kind of wanting to be in relationships, and I don't tend to ask why. Do you know what I mean? I can tell you from that viewpoint, I can say all the things I love about being in a marriage that feels good. But that's starting from that place already of saying, by the way, I happen to really like this relationship thing. So I say, even when I didn't, I was, it was struggling, but I wanted it anyway. I wanted to be in a relationship. So I knew when I broke up from that earlier marriage and I hadn't met anybody yet, I knew I would seek out probably a marriage in my case, which is what it turned out, because I like that. So there are lots of people like me. There are also lots of people like you who can't, who don't immediately have this sense of, oh, I just want to be partnered. And so to explain to, it reminds me of a little, I mean, maybe this is a slightly silly analogy, but, I love chocolate. I have a friend who's allergic to chocolate who loves chocolate, and that I can understand. My gut can understand that one. It's like, oh, bummer for him. He's allergic to chocolate. I have another friend who isn't allergic to chocolate, but doesn't like it. And her, I tend to think of, what planet are you from? Now that's silly of me because there's lots of people like her too. So if you have to ask the question, I don't know that there's anything somebody could say that would convince you ought to be in a relationship. Does that make sense? Because it's
Mm.
like if you're not wired to want it, why would you want it? Now, that doesn't mean you wouldn't benefit from it. And here's another element of a huge variability among people. When you talk about, being in a relationship means you're with somebody all the time. Well, very, very few people are with their partner 24/7. And even people such as myself that I just love to be married. I love to be partnered with that particular person also. We're not together 24/7 and we have different things that we do. We're still separate individuals. I don't think it would work very well if we weren't. So, there's degrees and there's varying degrees that different couples are more or less independent or more or less interdependent. So that varies also.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I had kind of, figured out. I mean, I guess the problem was and this is a very classic problem with my brain type, is, expectation versus reality.
Hmm.
Um, I had always thought like, oh yeah, like a really great relationship, I will feel, seen and heard and, accepted for who I am. And they will, understand, especially as someone who struggles to understand themselves and as someone who struggles, I had to sit in therapy for 5 years to figure out what the fucking emotion was. Um,
Yeah.
and I had to literally draw myself a guide of when this, if that, like, like like code, when
Yeah. Yeah.
this, that means this, sort of thing. Um, then it's like, and they'll understand that better than better than I do. They'll be able to pick up on
Mhm.
it better and faster than I do or will. And I realized that's probably a really high and unfair bar. Um
Well, yes, there's a quantitative aspect to that. So, in other words, I don't think that expectation is utterly unrealistic in the sense that sometimes you can have these lovely moments when you feel seen and understood, and maybe even more than you see and understand yourself. That can happen. That can happen. To expect that to be true all the time is kind of a death knell for a relationship, because no
yeah.
human being can provide that to any other human being. And moreover, it's funny. We about a year and a half ago, I think it was, my wife and I we do a podcast, and the did I already mention that? I forgive me if I have or haven't mentioned that, but we do a
No, you have
podcast.
not mentioned it.
Let me plug the podcast. It's called Couples Therapy in 7 Words, and I'll
Mm.
even tell you what the 7 words are. Actually, we have it's really kind of ridiculous. We have merch. Here's I don't know how many people are watching this versus hearing it. Probably more people are hearing it. But
Yeah.
there's the logo, Couples Therapy in 7 Words, and the 7 words are: be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And we can get into that if you want. But my point being, we do a podcast, and about a year and a half ago, we were, and you can relate to this probably, we had a guest scheduled to interview. We're going to be interviewing a guest, and they had an emergency. They didn't show. So we're
Yeah.
sitting there thinking, well, we want to make the podcast. What should we do? And I said to my wife, oh, I know. Let's make a podcast about the one skill that solves all relationship problems. I could have made it even more ridiculously grandiose. I could have said that solves all relationship problems for all people. That's, not too grandiose, right? Just a
Right.
tad. So, and my wife looked at me like, "Oh yeah, right," but whatever. She went along. She was nice. So we made this podcast. So what is this one skill that I claim solves all relationship problems? It is the ability to be mildly annoyed. That's the ability to be mildly annoyed. Because
Ah,
yes,
that's
and
so
you've got it.
good.
Yeah.
I'm
When you
so
are,
terrible at that. Like if
well, of course.
if I'm bothered, nothing is. I'm one of those people. If I'm bothered about something, nothing's right. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
if I could win the lottery and get the keys to a great car and a real estate portfolio, but if someone said something at 9:03 a.m. that I'm still bothered about, I don't give a damn. I'm back
Yeah.
at 9:03 being like, this is all great, but you said something at 9:03 that really like when
Yeah.
I'm bothered for at least for the rest of the day, if not several days. That's where my mind stops and nothing else matters.
Oh, absolutely. And you see where that goes in a relationship because here's another given. And there was a guy who wrote a book about this a few years ago. I think the title of the book was Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person. And he
Yes.
wasn't cynical. Do you remember reading about that?
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
have you both on, I
that's
think
the
is his name.
School of Life guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and what he was saying was no matter who you pick, you're picking some annoyances.
Yeah.
And it's just a different person just gives you different annoyances, but there's going to be some, is the point. And he wasn't cynical about marriage. He was just saying, you just have to expect to be annoyed, and which is, fits right in with my little thesis there. That, and of course, in my own relationship, I always like to point out, no, I'm the annoying one. My wife is very nice about how annoying I am. She's not annoying. I don't find her annoying, but she's very nice about being annoyed with me, which is why we get along so well. That phenomenon that you have to expect there will be annoyances. It's not going to be this wonderful person in your life will constantly be exactly what you need them to be and constantly be, reading you perfectly and constantly, showing up just when you want them to show up with exactly the right mood. It ain't going to happen. It'll happen once in a while, but it won't, often it won't. And when there's a big store of goodwill between the couple, when they've had lots of deposits in the emotional bank account, so to speak, when they're feeling really good about each other and enjoying each other, and when their bodies are trained so that when they're in each other's presence, they feel relaxed rather than tense. When
Yeah.
that's the case, they've got plenty of room to annoy each other without it being any big deal. It's
Hmm.
just funny. After a while, it's just silly. It's like, well, that's, she knows I'm capable of forgetting certain things, and she doesn't yell at me about it. She just laughs because, that happens. That's one of the nice things about getting older, by the way. You have a built-in excuse for forgetting shit. That's what happens. So that ability to be annoyed is, that's the issue. And so when you set what you were describing such a high bar for a relationship, this person's going to be just perfect at knowing me and seeing me. Well, no, she's not. She's, she'll be who she is.
Yeah. No, no, I mean, I think that's the mild annoyances. Yeah, that is definitely an area where I struggle. My mom always thought that when I was a kid, always thought that was the strangest thing. Like, I don't let go of stuff very fast. This
Mm,
was a particular problem with my ex because she's fast cycling bipolar. So she'll say something at 9 a.m., something else at noon, and at 5 o'clock be absolutely in love and enamored with me. And I'm kind of like, but you did this and said, and she's like, haven't you moved on from that by now? I'm like, no, I'll be
mm,
bothered for the next week about this. Like, no, you just scheduled 7 days of unhappiness for me. That's what you did. I've
yeah.
cleared the schedule. Like, I will be out of sorts for days just from today. And what's worse is we'll do this tomorrow, and it just keeps piling and piling and piling and
Well,
piling.
of
And
course.
eventually, I'm the one that says, I can't take this anymore. We were
Yeah.
off and on for 5 years, and every single time it was the I'm not going through this emotional roller coaster every single time with it piling up and everything. And one of the things I realized in the postmortem is I kind of ended up in a very similar cycle with my own parents in terms of, especially when I was a teenager, we would usually have some sort of big blowout fight every about 3 to 6 months or so. Now, part of that was due to my mom's own narcissism cycle, but 4 years out from autism diagnosis, because we have to be circumspective, I also realized that was about the time I put up with their stuff enough, sort of thing. And so it's
Yeah.
like there, I have a capacity, but
Hmm.
it's limited. And when
Hmm.
you run out of it, then it's not, then unfortunate conversations and fights and whatnot happen thereafter. So it's yeah, that's but those are just the tolerating anxiety for intimacy and and learning how to deal with mild annoyances. That I can tell. Yes, I agree with you though. Those are so important. I now kind of see why like that's really a fundamental building blocks. My brain is just hopelessly broken. That's what we're learning from this conversation. I was flawed from manufacture. I am the
I
Ford
never like
Pinto of
to.
people.
I don't like
Yes,
to agree with someone's assertion that something is hopeless. I'm kind of in the hope business. So
that
I'm
is
hoping it
true.
isn't hopelessly broken because look, well, I'm sure you realize this too. I mean, autism, of course, as you know better than I mean, it's a spectrum sort of thing.
Yeah,
And it is, and anybody in any place on that spectrum, like whether or not they're diagnosable on the spectrum, can learn. We all learn from experience, and so there are ways of being there where you might discover in not that long as you grow, as you learn, as you experience more things, that you're actually more able to tolerate mild anxiety than you thought you could. That could well happen. I hope that for you, I guess, because it makes things easier.
yeah,
Your description of saying, well, you've just scheduled 7 days of, feeling shitty,
right.
that that phenomenon, it makes sense from a standpoint of saying, well, yeah, why would someone do that? You do that because that is your body, brain, whatever, keeping you safe. It's like it's a lot safer to be in, don't come near me mode than it is to be vulnerable to someone.
Yeah,
There's a logic to that. So as you feel more able and more, as you develop some more skills, you might discover that doesn't have to happen as much. I don't know. I mean, time will tell.
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm 37 in 2 weeks. I think we're kind of baked in on that by this point. Um, but no, I mean, it is. Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I will say I'm definitely a person. I don't let stuff go easily. It takes me quite a bit of time to process things, especially if I can't have have that conversation with that person in that moment, which was the kind of the other problem we had, is we had two definitions of dealing with stuff. I grew up in a household with parents who didn't go to, they were the don't go to bed angry people.
Oh yeah.
sort of thing. And I also grew up
Hmm.
very religious.
Hmm.
So and we were evangelical and fundamental Baptist and all that sort of thing, which my ex did not, and she thinks all of that is absolutely insane. We also homeschooled, and at one point she's like, "I don't even think you had a real education." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's great to hear." But all this, all this sort of thing, and and so I'm the type of person kind of like, if there's a problem, I want to sit down, I want to address it, and I want to talk about it so that I can start the process of moving on, which will take
Hmm.
at least a week. I've got it down from a week. It used to be 3 months. I've got it down to a week.
That is
Um,
progress. Yeah.
yes, in my 20s, I'd be mad for a long time. I don't have energy for that these days.
Mm-hmm.
But so I can then start the process of moving on. She was much more into the, well, yeah, there's problems, but life has to continue. It's all just chaotic, so whatever have you. And I'm kind of like, no, I'm not just living with this. Are you crazy? Like,
Hmm.
no, this is a problem. This is a stop everything and talk type of situation. And I realized that's because of the family system I grew up in, because that was what my parents did. They stopped, discussed, dealt with, and then moved on. She grew up in basically constant sort of ever flowing chaos where
Yeah.
things were dealt with or not, and most importantly, or not. Um,
Hmm.
as just kind of the time in the river went on, and some stuff never got addressed because bigger rocks had fallen into the creek, sort of thing.
Hmm.
And that's a very difficult thing when you have two different systems
Hmm.
trying to
Yeah.
come together.
Yeah, that's another thing where, of course, people vary. And that is a classic that you talk about in couples where there's sort of the pursuer distancer type, thing that goes on, and it
Yeah,
tends to amplify itself. They polarize more because one person's reaction is just increasing the other person's panic.
right.
So the one who wants to talk about it right away is panicking by the other person's resistance to talk about it, and the one who that person's insistence on talking about it is panicking the one who's trying to resist it, and they just end up driving each other's panic further and further.
Yeah, yes. I've lived that.
Yeah,
Yes.
been there, done
can,
that, right? Yes.
can confirm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a quite difficult it's a quite difficult thing, which is how I kind of eventually came to the conclusion, because we would do things for each other, but it wasn't what the other person was looking for. And
Yeah.
so if you asked both of us separately, we would both say, "We did so much, we invested so much. He doesn't understand what I've done. She doesn't understand what I've done," all this sort of thing. And I'm kind of like, I think we're two really great people who care about each other a great deal, but we don't work,
Yeah.
sort of
That's what
thing.
it's sounding like, right? So that's what you've concluded.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was, I mean, it was just one of the things like we just come from two such different worlds that the stuff that matters to me, the way I demonstrate, does not matter
Hmm.
to her. And the stuff that she's doing didn't matter to me, although now I figured out what it was and I get it now. Like,
Hmm.
oh, like, okay, if a relationship is about being with someone that you love to spend time with, it's like, okay, then I understand why. Because I was just kind of like, why is it every time there's a problem, you just show up here? Like, that, why are you here? Sort of thing. And I realized that was how, because she's a quality time person, that was how she was showing that she. Whereas for me, I'm like, but here's how I show love. I'm like, but then I have to buy all your snacks, buy all your drinks, and clean the house. It
Mm,
takes me
yeah.
2 days to prepare for your arrival. Like,
Hmm.
I'm last year I got sued. My business is falling. I mean, we had business problems last year, all this type of thing. So I'm like, I'm super stressed. The last thing I need is you here. Because it takes
Hmm.
2 days to prepare for your arrival. Like, don't stay away. Like, go
Yeah.
away. And I realized that was you two different. It's like China buying Hong Kong back from the British.
Yes.
One country, two systems.
Yes. Yeah,
And
and
our
it
systems just never merged
no.
well.
Yeah, and look, of course, maybe saying the obvious, you can have many such cases of two very good people who
Yeah.
are loving toward each other who just don't work. They just aren't compatible with each other.
And that was the conclusion I sort of came to at the end. And in subsequent conversations, I think the problem now is I figured out, to your point about my expectations were completely in uncharted territory, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And then also not understanding, oh, what you get out of it is just having someone and you're like, that's it. That's the job. That's the assignment. That's all that there is to it. And
Yeah.
I was expecting a lot more and then doing a lot of stuff that I realize now wasn't moving the needle because it's not helpful to anyone sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's just kind of it's left me in this very odd spot. And we're coming back to you, I promise. Um, it left it in this very odd spot where I don't even know what a relationship means or is anymore.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was funny because when I saw your booking today, I was kind of like, oh God, a relationship therapist. And I'm kind of like, but on the bright side, I've had this on the brain, so we'll get through this. This isn't so bad. I mean, when it comes to I'm just in a place in my life now where I don't know what a relationship is anymore. I'm not dating or anything because I'm so confused by this whole
Yeah.
system. It does not make any sense. So I would say, I guess my question for you then would be, um, having wasted a lot of my 30s on this one person and now being nearer to 40 than not, sad day for me. Um, how does one come back from all of this? How does one rediscover? I mean, it's kind of like being when you're with someone for that long, it's like getting a divorce sort of thing.
Sure.
We weren't married, but it was like getting a divorce sort of thing. I mean, I had to take her stuff back. It had a lot of shades of being divorced. In fact, some of my
Yeah.
married friends are kind of like, it feels like you're getting a divorce. I'm like, I know, but we weren't married. But if we did it for 5 years, it feels like we're
Yeah.
divorcing.
Oh,
Um,
sure, that's a long time. Yeah.
yeah. How does one come back from this and re-engaging in relationships again in a way that makes sense now understanding okay, this is what a relationship is. Okay, you're 110% right. I cannot expect them to do all of that understanding of me all the time. So they, okay, I get that. I get that. I've gathered all this knowledge, but now I'm so confused about what a relationship even is.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you come back from this?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I
a
said
great.
we'd get back to you in a minute. It just took me a while to get there.
No, that's fine. No, that is a great question, and I don't have a simple answer. I think if I did, I wouldn't trust it. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
yeah, and there coincidentally, you
Or you'd be
mentioned,
talking to Oprah.
or I'd be, yes, exactly. That's true. I
Mm.
would, and I've seen plenty of people talking to Oprah, and I'm thinking, yeah, that's probably bullshit. But whatever.
Mm.
Look, I mentioned, did I mention that my second book? Maybe I did mention this. The book before this one that just came out, Betrayal and Forgiveness, came out last year. The one before that was called "It's Not About Communication: Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy Is Wrong." Snarky title.
Yeah.
Why am I writing a book with a snarky title? Well, I'm pointing out that everything I know about couples therapy is wrong too. In other words, I don't have all the answers either. And people who think they have all the answers are giving the last word, that are doing harm, not good. But leaving aside that, there's a funny coincidence because you mentioned you're about to turn 37. Well, in
Yeah.
a few weeks, I'm about to turn 74, which is exactly twice your age.
Yeah.
So that, believe it or not, is relevant to what I'm about to say, which is, I mean, not the fact that it's exactly twice, but how do you come out of that and possibly have any interest in engaging in relationships when everything you said makes sense? It's like you don't even know what they're for. You don't know how to relate to that at this point. I don't know a simple formula, but I do know, just from having lived twice as long as you, I know things happen in your life that open up other possibilities, including other possibilities for how you feel about things. So perhaps you will have some experiences with other people. You'll have some experiences that will open up maybe some desire that you'd like to be in a kind of relationship. Maybe you'll meet someone who will really fill the bill in ways that your ex obviously didn't. You just don't know. I've known lots of people, I mean, older people, I've known lots of people who have said, like they're widowed or they're divorced or something like that. And they've said, yeah, I'm too old. I have no interest in being in a relationship. And next thing you know, they're unexpectedly in a relationship because they met somebody that just piqued their interest. So I wouldn't, I don't think there's any predicting how it's going to go for anybody, for you or anybody else.
No, no. I guess my thing is like I've learned. I guess my mental model for oh this is what a relationship is and how it works has been so much has been added on to it. I'm like having trouble conceiving of the concept. It's like okay, it's about spending important time together. That's really the whole assignment. Get that right. If you
Mhm.
do nothing else, get that right. And really dropping down the expectations of what someone's going to bring to the table and how much they're going to understand me, sort of thing.
Mhm.
Okay, can do that. My brain's now kind of like, what? I wouldn't even know how like if a beautiful woman walked into the room right now, I wouldn't even know how to even start a conversation for a date,
Mhm.
which is sad because I never had any problems with that. I never had any weird hangups. Like I was in band, choir, and the performing arts. I was around women all the time. They were never weird, mysterious creatures to me. And
Mhm.
then when I was in college, never had any problems. Always had a girlfriend and girls in my phone. I got into
Mhm.
house parties because I could bring 5 girls with me with a phone call. Like never had any problem. All this type of thing. It was great, great. And I worked in fashion for a long time. I've seen absolutely gorgeous women in underwear or less. It was lovely, all this sort of thing. Never had a problem. Now, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm kind of all thumbs. Like,
Yeah.
mysterious woman, like, oh God, like, how do I even talk or approach? Like, this
Yeah.
must be what it feels like to be 16. Like,
Well,
I
in
missed this stage, but okay, now we're here,
now you're here, and
Yeah,
it's that's a great analogy. Actually, it's like, yeah, you're having to go through some more adolescence when you thought you were past that, which is,
yeah,
by the way, real common in your 30s. That's not like that's too late for that stuff at all.
yeah,
And moreover, the other model to throw in here is, it takes a while to get over a painful relationship.
yeah.
And that just takes some time. And by the way, your what you were saying about like cutting off contact, humanely, but cutting off contact, that is a very wise thing to do, in my humble opinion, often.
Yeah.
Because people who keep trying to, like you said, relitigate it just keeps you miserable. It doesn't really do any good. I'll often see couples where the one who's doing the breaking up wants to let the other one down easy, so they'll keep trying to be friends. It doesn't do them any favors. It does
No.
not do them any favors at all. It just keeps them miserable. So the idea of saying, yeah, just take space from each other psychically as much as you can, you'll heal, and then you'll be able to think about other stuff and not be so freaked out.
Yeah, I mean it's so we broke up a year in June. I finally did the block thing in November, December time when I said, I mean we the last conversation we had, I was very kind, I was very polite. I learned a lot in that last conversation, kind of about like, oh, my whole mental model for all this stuff is wrong. We've talked about how my mental model was wrong. That a lot of that came from that kind of final conversation and all this type of thing. And I was kind of like, if I'm gonna heal from this and move on, I can't stay in that space because if every conversation we had didn't turn into breakup relitigation, I'd be kind of like, okay, we can talk occasionally.
Mhm.
Like some of my friends that I touch base with quarterly, we will not talk any more than corporate America does earnings, but it's fine. Like
Mhm.
sort of thing. But it's like we're talking all the time and every conversation is going back to that because part of it's she wants to get back together. I'm kind of like, nope, we reopened that chapter 2 times in 5 years,
Mhm.
not doing that again. We're good, like sort of
Yeah.
thing. And it's a very difficult thing. But that's handy advice. I think in this case, I think you're right. Time is definitely a healing factor.
Yeah. If
For
you don't
me,
keep going
yeah,
back, that's the thing. Do you know what I
yeah, yeah,
mean?
yeah.
That you're what that exactly what you're describing. And of course, it does. If she wants to get back together, it's not a kindness to her to keep talking to her. If
No,
you have clearly no intention of doing so, it's actually kinder to her, even from that perspective. It's kinder to her to just give her no, it's like, how they get, well, how this works with people, how people do slot machines and they'll keep doing them and doing them and doing them. It's called
yes,
intermittent reinforcement. It
yes,
it
yes,
keeps it going forever,
yeah.
and so intermittent reinforcement is not a good thing to do when you're trying to split up. It's much better to do cold turkey.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I've always kind of felt that that's not, her philosophy. And she talks about like, oh, I'm more friends with all my exes. I'm like, I can name two right now you haven't talked to in years, but that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but my one of my friends that she talks to, I said, yeah, she talks a good game, but I know the truth. Like, so sort of thing. So no, it's definitely important to move on. And really, I've only had about maybe not quite 5 months of like out of my space,
Yes.
ready to move, all this type of thing. And I realize it definitely takes time, sort of thing.
Hmm.
But I also want to kind of touch on a little bit for, those who kind of circling back to your book because we're almost at the hour. Um, for those who have felt, betrayed emotionally, financially, physically, or whatever have you. What are the three things from your book that help people bounce back from that?
Mm.
I'm asking because I have several people who are going to get sent this episode personally.
Well, I welcome to them, whoever they happen to, you know them and I
Yes,
don't.
yes,
Welcome to
yes,
them.
exactly. Yeah,
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 well,
yeah,
that's a great question. Well, first of all, understanding for understanding what forgiveness means and what it
yeah.
doesn't mean. That's something important that I talk about.
Mm,
Forgiveness, you can forgive somebody. The way I talk about forgiveness, I didn't coin this phrase, but I like it. It's an inside job. In other words, forgiveness has almost nothing to do with the person you're forgiving. It's not for their sake, it's for your own sake. There's a wonderful Anne Lamott quote that everybody who talks about this, or many people who talk about this, use. She said something like, to not forgive is like drinking rat poison and waiting for the rat to die, which I
right.
think is a great, get the poison out of you, then you can think about the rat. There may still be a rat, but you can think more clearly about them when you're not poisoned. So forgiveness is about getting past the trauma of it, getting past that, that clutching feeling whenever you think about it. That takes time. It takes a process, and I have a whole discussion in the book about how you might go about finding forgiveness, if you even should, because there's some circumstances where you shouldn't. There's some circumstances, if you're still in the middle of an abusive relationship, you need the anger. You need something that will keep signaling you that you need to get the hell out. So sometimes forgiveness is not, you're not ready to forgive, but eventually, if you want to move on, you're going to need to find a way where you're not obsessed with it. And that's really all I mean by forgiving. Then, so there's that. The whole process of forgiveness is one thing that I talk a lot about in the book. Then there's also the question, okay, so if you can find your way mostly to forgiveness, if you can think about it without freaking out, without hating the other person, without even being particularly angry, then you have to figure out, well, okay, what do I want to do about my relationship with this person? Because you can forgive somebody that you're going to divorce. You can forgive somebody you're still going to sue. Speaking of lawsuits, you can
Right.
forgive somebody
Yeah.
that you're going to prosecute in court. And I've known folks who've done all of those things.
Yeah.
So it's possible to do that, and at least when you do that, you're still thinking clearly. You're not obsessed with it. So if you want to rebuild trust with someone in a relationship that's important to you, and talk about like parents of kids, where they're going to have a relationship whether or not they stay together or not. They want to find a way of building some kind of trust, and if they actually want to stay married to each other, they don't want to be feeling, neither party wants to feel like one of them's the villain and one of them's the probation officer. That's no fun. So they're going to need to find a way to trust if they can. And that, I said forgiveness is an inside job. Trust involves both people. And that's going to involve developing a level of understanding for what the hell happened, how the person could have done what they did, which was presumably out of character or wouldn't have been experienced as a betrayal. If you say, well, I knew that person was going to do that, it's not really a betrayal. It's bad, but betrayal is when somebody does something that you just never would have thought in a million years they would do to you. That's what betrayal is. And you need to forgive that and then develop trust. You have to be able to understand it enough, both parties understand it enough to get a sense of, wow, we've learned so that we have good reason to think this wouldn't happen again. We know, if it's infidelity, for example, we know that the circumstances that led to that, we can now talk about. So it's not going to get to that. We might end up splitting up, but nobody's going to cheat anymore.
Yeah.
So that's, building trust involves both parties. And a third thing I'll throw in, which is kind of the third part of my little formula, the 7 words, the have faith part, because I'm not necessarily talking about religious faith. Religious faith can include this, or this can include religious faith. But the faith part I'm talking about is sort of essential for a couple. It's a mindset that says this whole existence business and this whole coupling business, even, there's something right about it, even if it's awful right now. There's something right about this whole living business. Even when it's painful, there's some meaning in it, even when it's hard. And that's the mindset that helps people heal. And for you in your situation, it's what will help you get past the pain you've gone through in that relationship and that breakup will be this general sense that, yeah, but isn't the world interesting anyway? It's like, yeah, there's something right about the fact that people are sometimes different. There's even something right about the fact that people try to be in relationships and they don't work out all the time.
Right.
There's something inherent in being human, and that's generally good, not generally bad. So those
Mm.
are that was a lot about three things, but that's what I was
No, no, that's perfect. I wanted people to kind of have that takeaway, so they'll go and buy the book and or any of the books that you have,
thinking.
and engage or come and listen to your podcast,
Hmm.
as well. So yeah, yeah, I've definitely found at this stage of life. My little wagon has certainly gotten overturned. I've had to really deal with some of one of the things I didn't realize is how much my concept of relationships and what things I thought about them has a lot to do with my religious upbringing. And I kind
Mm,
of had to
yeah.
go and revisit those topics. Unfortunately, I have friends who grew up the same way and that I can talk about it very frankly with and who get it sort of thing.
Hmm.
Which is a tonic for me and really kind of, revisit a lot of that stuff and realize how much that stuff was still very influential and it's time to think about things a little bit differently.
Hmm.
Um, because I grew up in a system where, you know, like I struggle with like what attraction means at this stage of life because I grew up in a system where attraction was based upon, is she a woman of God? Does she, do you want to start a family with this person? Is it who God's laid on your heart to be with sort of thing? That's attraction was so based in that it wasn't based on is this person complimenting me and my journey? Is she on board with my mission? And what I'm wanting to do with my life and all this sort of thing and I had to kind of I'm in the middle of retracing my steps on a lot of that and even understanding that piece and then also trying to figure out what all does this whole relationship thing mean.
Mm,
But I'm not in all of this, I'm not necessarily totally ready to throw in the towel. I just don't have a good mental picture of what it looks like at this age.
yeah.
And I think that was my other kind of problem is I'm also still trying to adjust to what does it mean now? What does it mean today?
Hmm.
And I didn't realize how much of my thinking was still stuck in like 2003, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, and that is often, and look, that doesn't just happen at the age you're at. I mean,
Yeah,
anytime at the one constant is change. As we get older and
absolutely.
stuff changes and a lot of things change, and we often come to view things quite differently than we did when we were younger, and I think that's a normal part of the process of growth.
Yeah, I think I really have I mean all of this is kind of like oh and trying and so now I'm trying to figure out well what is what does this mean to me at this stage of life, what would I even be looking for sort of thing and trying to figure out and understand that is its own kind of weird journey. Not going to get into it at this juncture. We're past the
Mm.
hour, but yeah, it's a very difficult thing. But yeah, but again, kind of also getting used to this, a whole new idea and a whole new view of it all. And
Mm.
so hopefully people listening to this will have maybe possibly been similarly effective and will have found all of this incredibly helpful.
I
But
hope so.
oh, well, we're well over time. This episode's going to run long. So, this is the part of the show where we do plugs.
Hmm.
Um, so let us know where we can find you online, where we can buy your book or listen to your podcast.
Well, you can find me online at brucechalmer.com, just plain old my name.com, brucechalmer.com. That's where you'll have links to all of the various things there. My books are available, as they say, anywhere books are sold. I push Amazon just because that more people find out about it when you get it at Amazon, which is kind of maybe unfortunate, but that's the way it works.
Mm.
So, and I especially like reviews there, by the way. That's a little plug for that as well. The
Absolutely.
podcast, the title of the podcast, you can search for it because it's on all of the podcast platforms. It's called Couples Therapy in 7 Words. Or you can go to our podcast website, which is CTIN7, that's the numeral 7, CTIN7.com. That'll get you to our podcast website as well. Or you can just search for Couples Therapy in 7 Words. And you'll have access to all of our episodes. We've had 200 and some episodes now. I've been doing it for about 5 years. So people are welcome to do that as well. And if anybody, the other thing you'll get at my website, brucechalmer.com, is just information about my practice. If people are interested in working with me, particularly couples, they can find information about that at my website.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dr. Chalmer, for going through this whole journey that I've drugged you through for the past hour. So,
I'm honored to have been drugged through it. I don't feel like I was dragged through it at all. No, it's this is the kind of work I do. I like this stuff, you know. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.